Off and running. Okay. Our lesson today is in the first 15 verses of chapter 19. And if you read the first verse, then it was told Joab, behold, the king is weeping and mourns for Absalom. Why is he mourning for Absalom?
That's his favorite son.
His son's dead, isn't he?
Right, passed away.
And why is he dead? What happened in chapter 18 that we skipped?
Joab
Absalom
was slain by somebody.
By Joab.
Brother, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Or,
No, the other way around. Absalom killed his brother, Amnon, right, who was the oldest brother, who was in line to be the next king, because Amnon had raped Absalom's sister,
right.
Tamar, right? They waited 2 years and he killed him. Well, his punishment was being basically sent into exile, right, for 3 years. And when Joab convinced David to bring Absalom back, he still wouldn't let him come into the palace and see his face for another X number of years, right? Well, in the meantime, Absalom says, all right, then I'm going to figure out how to become king. And he started sitting in the gate of Jerusalem and talking to all the people coming and going, and he swayed basically the whole country, just about, to follow him. And apparently he'd gotten restored where he could see David, so he went in and asked David if he could go to Hebron to worship. David said sure, so he goes to Hebron and declares himself king, and has the horns blown all over Israel, announcing that Absalom is now king, right, in Hebron. So David, the word comes to David that Absalom is now the king, and the people are all with him. David gets in this panic, this is our lesson last week, right, and flees Jerusalem and takes his bunch with him, all the loyal followers, which is, part of the military, and his other sons and daughters and wives and concubines, and right. But he left some concubines there to, quote, take care of the palace. Well, Absalom then took that opportunity under the one of his advice of his advisor, and he sets up a tent. He goes in and sleeps with each one of them, demonstrating that he is the king. You wouldn't dare do that if you weren't the king, right? David had a spy left behind, which is named Hushai, I think, who gave Absalom bad advice that don't go after David right away, get yourself organized here, and then you can go take care of David, because David's, people were in disarray, just kind of fleeing out. And Abiathar had given advice, no, go get him right now and trap him up against the Jordan River, and But he listened to the advice of Hushai and waited. David was able to get across the Jordan River and then start organizing, right? Now, David had had a lot of experience in the wilderness. Absalom had not, nor had any of his military, right? So they go out to fight David in so-called the wilderness of Ephraim, which apparently was just across the Jordan. We don't really know for sure. And David's army, even though they were outmanned, was able to decimate Absalom's army.
You mean Joab, not Absalom. Absalom's his son.
Yeah, he was the head. He was there, right, leading his army, right? Joab was the head of David's army and was the commander over one of the 3 divisions that David divided his army into. Okay? So they go into battle, okay? And it's amazing to me how we kind of skip over some of this stuff, but as God's word tells us, 20,000 men died that day. in that battle. 20,000. And when you think about the population, I mean, today 20,000 is a large number.
Yeah.
We got 330 million Americans now. You know, they couldn't have had 1 million people in the entire country at that time. Probably nowhere near that. 20,000 was a big, big number. And we just gloss over it as we read through the story. You know, 20,000 men died. Well, there's a reason why God told us that. It was a big deal, right? Well, Absalom, riding his donkey, you know, Absalom's got his full head of hair and probably had some kind of a headdress thing on, signifying him as the king and whatnot. And he's going through the thicket in the forest of Ephraim and gets his deal caught up, and the donkey takes off and leaves him just hanging there by his hair. One guy sees him, and he goes and tells Joab, and Joab says, "You didn't kill him?" He said, "No, I didn't kill him." David said, "I heard David tell all you guys to make sure that Absalom is okay," right? And I'm just a lowly private or whatever he was. If I went in there and told David I killed his son, he'd have had me chopped into 100 pieces. You know? There's no way I would survive that. Joab grabbed 3 spears and went and killed Absalom. And then his guys finished him off. Well, I don't know what that means. Right? If he's already dead from spears in the heart, right? But anyway, they buried him in a big cavern and threw a bunch of rocks on him. And that was the end of Absalom. So Joab goes and tells David that Absalom is dead. Right? And so we start with chapter 19, right? That the king is weeping and mourns for Absalom, right? At the very end of 18, right? He's like, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, right?" You know, it's interesting that it's obviously anybody, when you lose a son, you know, it's a big, big deal, right? This is a son who's trying to kill you. Okay?
Well, he's also the one that confiscated his crown.
Yeah, he's rebelling, right? You know, so obviously he's not following the will of God at all, right?
Well, he must have been a really spoiled brat. They said that he was very handsome.
Right? He was the best looking, potentially in all of Israel,
Yeah.
right? You know, so they, whatever that meant in those days, I don't know. Maybe because of all his hair. You know, I don't know. But, and here he got away with murder, killing David's firstborn son.
Yeah.
You would think David would have had much more remorse over that than over the death of the thirdborn son, who had killed the firstborn son, right? And is rebelling against him and trying to kill him. And we'll find out in here that Joab's telling him that, shoot, this guy was about to kill you, your wives, your sons, your daughters, you know, your concubines.
Why are you mourning?
Yeah.
You ought to be celebrating.
Right? And so, now, Joab, like I say, he's taking that next step, right? He kills Absalom, takes it on himself against David's direct orders, right? Right. Remember, he's the one that reconciled Absalom to David. But then he's loyal to David as the king. Absalom rebelled. He said, "All right, dude, you're over." So he killed him. And he tells David that Absalom is dead, right? And verse 2, the victory that day was turned to mourning for all the people. For the people heard it said that day, the king is grieved for his son, right? So the people went by stealth into the city that day as people who are humiliated, you know, steal away when they flee in battle. So it's the victorious army is basically disbanding and going home as if they had lost. They're so disturbed by how David is reacting here we won this victory, and here you're acting like we've done a bad thing.
Yeah.
Right? You'd rather, like Joab says, right? You'd rather that we were all dead than your enemy. Right? So they're acting as if they'd lost, and what do you think's going on in their mind? The king is chased out of Jerusalem, basically. The new king comes in, so to speak. He's now killed. And so the rest of our story is about David coming back as king and the difficulty there was in coming back, right? So there was no assurance that David was going to remain as king. Especially after this behavior, they're like, well, you don't appreciate what we did? How many of the 20,000 that died were in their army? And the other ones were all brothers and sisters, so to speak. They were all Israelites, right? 20,000 dead, and all you can do is grieve over the one who wanted to kill you, and your wives, and your sons, and your daughters, and your concubines, right? And take your throne. So the mindset, and this becomes important because this sets the stage at this point for the separation of the northern 10 tribes and southern Israel, right? After Solomon. This is when the stage is set for that rebellion. Right here. Okay? So now verse 4, the king covered his face and cried out with a loud voice, "O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son." And Joab came into the house to the king and said, now Joab, by the way, is David's nephew, right? And he's been with him through the whole time. He's been head of his army. He fought the Civil War when David was king in Hebron, and he's fighting with the other people, etc. He said, today you have covered with shame the faces of all your servants, who today have saved your life and the lives of your sons, your daughters, the lives of your wives, and the lives of your concubines. Right? I got to, but he said, today you've done this. Today, these guys went out and won that war. They won that big battle. But today you have put shame on them, right? By loving those who hate you and by hating those who love you. Right? And the Hebrew word, you could tell that your heart rate would change based on your emotions, so they figured the emotions came from the heart. Right? And so, but what he's saying is, you made a choice to love those who hate you and a choice to hate those who love you. You made that choice. So this is kind of like Nathan coming to David, but Nathan came with a story, right? And then you are the man, right? Joab just comes in and smacks him upside the face with it. He didn't beat around the bush at all. Because Joab obviously had been with David. Now remember, Joab had killed the commander of the northern army when they had reconciled, right? Because he had killed his brother, right? A lot of killing going on,
For an eye.
So it says, you love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have shown today that princes and servants are nothing to you. For I know this day that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, then you would be pleased. Again, remember, 20,000 people died that day. And David is overcome with remorse because one man, the enemy, right? David didn't have any remorse when he killed Goliath, right? The enemy. He chopped his head off and carried it around. He took his sword and all that stuff, right? And this guy had decided to be the enemy. And who was appointed by God to be king? David, right? Now when Saul was king, how did David act towards the king? Would he have ever lifted his hand?
No, he had his chance and didn't.
Had his chance many times, right? But Absalom, who's saying, I know better than God who should be king, and it should be me. Right? So he is way out of bounds. Obviously had not learned any real life lessons from his father, right?
That's right.
You know. Now, remember back, why is all this happening? Because David sinned with Bathsheba and killed Uriah and the other guys who died when they sent him right up against the wall, right? And so David is in his own mind, my son is dead. 2 of my sons are dead, right? In this case, he's kind of gotten over Amnon, and now he's just focused on Absalom. My son is dead, you know, because of what I did. Now, Joab's not seeing it that way. Neither is the rest of the army, right? And so he comes in and puts it right in his face, is that you really are way out of bounds here. So then the first word in verse 7 is now. But this Hebrew word means not just it's now, but it's get off your butt and just do something here, right? It's an action, right? Now therefore arise, go out and speak kindly to your servants. For I swear by the Lord, if you do not go out, surely not a man will pass the night with you. Right? And this will be worse than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now. You know, what's going to happen if the entire army, your army, abandons you now?
You're really stuck.
How many other people are going to rise up and say, I should be king? How many have already thinking it? Or at least we need a new king.
Yeah, this one's apparently very weak.
Yeah, to his relationship with his people, which had been so strong, is now extremely weak. Right? Matter of fact, in chapter 20, we read about the first guy who says, now I'm the king. Another guy. Right? So after this. So, the king arose in verse 8 and sat in the gate. Now what happens at the gate?
Well, we have an opportunity to talk to everybody that comes and goes into the city.
Yeah. And that's where the city business is conducted. Now in Jerusalem he had a palace, right? Etc. And so there were places to do that. But most of the time, in most cities, all city business is conducted by the gate, right? He's not in Jerusalem. He's still across the Jordan in, what's that town? Mahanaim, or however it's pronounced, Mahanaim, right? Okay, so he's sitting by the gate. And when they told all the people, and this is a military term for all the people, in other words, he told all the army, the word went to all the soldiers, saying, behold, the king is sitting in the gate. Then all the people came before the king. So he did what he was supposed to do. They now came to him, and he can show them the appreciation for what they have done for him. They could have joined Absalom, couldn't they? And wouldn't have had to go to war. It'd just been over. Just get rid of David, and we're moving on down the road. But they stuck with David. Now Israel had fled each to his tent. You know, they all were spreading out, okay? And all the people were quarreling throughout all the tribes of Israel. Some of them, of course, had already gone. They'd gone home, right? And so all throughout Israel, we've got this debate going on. Who now should be king? Absalom's dead. David's run away, right? Who's going to be king?
You gotta have a king.
Yeah, we learned that lesson back in the Saul days, right? They had to have a king, right? So they got all this quarreling going on, people trying to figure out what to do next, right? The king delivered us, they're figuring this out. The king delivered us from the hand of our enemies and from the hand of the Philistines. So David had done some great things, but now he has fled from Absalom? They couldn't figure this out. How come he couldn't handle this situation? If he could handle the Philistines, for crying out loud, why couldn't he handle Absalom?
Yeah, son.
Because he didn't want to. He didn't want to discipline him. He didn't want to, right? Okay? But so they had a level of confusion as to what's going on. Of course, a lot of them probably didn't know anything about Bathsheba, right? They didn't know anything about the death of Uriah. You know, that was all just things that happened in battle, right? However, Absalom, whom we appointed over us, has died in battle. Now then, why are you silent about bringing back the king? So the northern 10 tribes kind of figured this out, that, well, the best thing to do is just bring David back as our king. Right? He's done so many good things in the past. Yep, we aligned ourselves with Absalom, right? And he's mourning so much for the death of Absalom, he's surely not going to be mad at us for aligning with Absalom. Right? You know. So they figured it was a safe call, I think. But they accepted David back. On the other hand, the king, right? King David sent Zadok and Abiathar, the priest, saying, "Speak to the elders of Judah." Judah had not accepted him back. Judah is the biggest tribe, and Judah is David's blood, right? He's from the tribe of Judah. Remember, Jesus comes from the tribe of Judah, the Lion of Judah. Saying, "Speak to the elders of Judah, saying, why are you the last to bring the king back to his house, since the word of all Israel has come to the king, even to this house? You are my brothers, my bone," right? Now, Judah had recognized Absalom as the king in Hebron. So they had abandoned David already. But he's saying, "You're my flesh, my bone, my flesh. Why should you be the last to bring back the king?" Probably because they had accepted Absalom right off the bat in Hebron, right? And say to, let's get hold of this, Amasa, "You are not my bone and my flesh." Are you not? You know, he's got some kind of relationship with this guy, right? "May God do to me and more also, if I will not make you the commander of the army before me continually in place of Joab." This guy led Absalom's army. So first off, he was the enemy yesterday. Right? And now David said, "I'm going to make you head of all the army in Israel." Plus, his credentials aren't that good. He just lost the battle. So what's the logic of making him? I mean, the only reason is all the people in the army that was still alive, right, that was following Absalom would follow Amasa and would rejoin with David, right? But a commander of an army who doesn't follow, is not loyal to you, is that a good situation? Most coups take place because the commander of the army decides to switch who's going to be the leader. And frequently they decide it's going to be them. So this does not seem like a wise decision on David's part. And of course he's doing it because he's just hopping mad at Joab, who had just killed Absalom. Right? That's his only reason. Right? It's not a good reason, but that's his only reason. Thus he turned the hearts of all the men of Judah as one man, and they sent word to the king, saying, "Return, you and all your servants." So Judah did accept David back, right, as king. And in verse 15, the king returned and came as far as the Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal in order to go and meet the king and bring the king across the Jordan. You remember Gilgal?
Who is that?
Somebody's moving something heavy.
Is it the bell?
Is that the bells? Is that the second bell? Right? Gilgal is the town where they crossed the Jordan when they came out of Egypt and they came out of the wilderness and crossed the Jordan and came into the promised land. So David is like coming back into the promised land the same way. Right? Now, that's the only reason I can think of why God would tell us that it was at Gilgal. Right? Now, the other reason might be is they crossed the Jordan into the promised land there because at quote unquote, shall we call it low tide, that was the easiest place to cross, and apparently at this point it's still the easiest place to cross the Jordan. What other reason, right? So he's accepted back. So David's now retaking possession of the promised land, right? What's Jesus going to do? David's descendant.
He's gonna take back the promised land.
And the entire earth, right? You know, now he's not going to have to cross the Jordan, though, is he? He's coming down to the Mount of Olives, you know, right? And retake possession. So I think there's some symbolism there. Then we have the rest of chapter 19 is just some stories that God puts in there that sets up again this separation that's going to happen in the future. But there's demonstrations of David's no longer, his indecisiveness. For example, Mephibosheth, right? The servant of Saul, Ziba, had told David that Mephibosheth had aligned with Absalom, which was a lie because he wanted all of Mephibosheth's lands that were Saul's, right? He was just a servant that took care of it, so David gave it to him. When he comes back, Mephibosheth gets on some people to carry him, and they get all the way to Gilgal to help David come back. And David's like, what's up? And he tells him the rest of the story. And David decides to just split the land with him. The guy that lied to me wouldn't be getting half of the land.
No.
He was, just like done with the quarreling, right? Just split it, go on down the road. And Mephibosheth says, whatever you say, you could give it all to him. You're the king, right? He accepted it without any qualms. He had been loyal to David. He just couldn't travel because, remember, he's lame. Right? But the whole rest of chapter 19 is just those examples of how David's indecision is now setting the stage for what's going to happen after Solomon. Or appears to be. Chapter 19. Any comments, questions? Any of that kind of good stuff? All right, Lord, we thank you so much for bringing us to your house. You give us so many examples of the right way and the wrong way to do things. Here we have an example of how leaders can get way off base. There are always situations in our life where we're the leader, whether it's in our family or wherever. We need your Holy Spirit to guide us to make the right decisions, the godly decisions, to not create turmoil in our own family by not doing the right things ourselves. Thank you so much for your love and your grace. And Jesus, thank you for your forgiveness. It's in his name we pray. Amen.
Amen.